Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for being with us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. What I found most interesting in your book is the stuff you write about child development and child upbringing. And for example, you explain how overprotective parents can damage their children. Mm-hmm. You say it's far better to render beings in your care competent than to protect them. Do you think that parents today are more protective of their children than previous generations?
I would say that it looks like that, yes. I think there are complex reasons for that. I don't think that you can necessarily lay that at the feet of the parents. People are having fewer children, and they're having them later in life. And so I think both of those things, those are major demographic shifts, and I think that one of the consequences of that is that children's lives are much more organized than they used to be, which might have some advantages, but that also parents are more likely to overprotect. They're older and more cautious, and the children also don't have as many siblings, and of course siblings were part of the child raising process, and it's hard to be overprotected in some ways when you're competing with a bunch of siblings. So it's complicated, but I think that overprotection is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Rule 11 is do not bother children when they are skateboarding. Mm-hmm. This is a recurring theme in your book. If we are overprotective with our children, we will create weak individuals.
Well, you demolish people's resilience that way. I mean, life is difficult, and you cannot protect your children. What you can do is prepare them, and you can prepare them to be strong and courageous and truthful and resilient and reciprocal in their interactions with other people. And that means you equip them for what life will be, which is at minimum a series of difficult challenges, and often more than that, because of course people go through very difficult times in their lives. And a resilient person is capable of standing up to things in the face of fear and moving forward voluntarily, convinced of their own competence and ability to prevail. And so your primary goal as a parent, apart from facilitating your child's social desirability, which is a major obligation on your part, is to encourage your children and I mean that literally, to instill in them a sense of courage in the face of the difficulties of life, and not to protect them from that. We don't even want to be protected from those difficulties, because a major part of life and its meaning is the challenge that comes with confronting difficulties. So,
yeah. What do you want to say to those parents that allow their 8 or 9-year-old sons to sleep in their beds at night instead of sleeping in their own rooms?
Well, the first thing I would say about that is you might want to ask why you don't want privacy with your spouse. You know, the last thing you want to do is use your child as an excuse to not interact properly with your wife or your husband. There's all sorts of reasons that people allow their children to interfere with their relationship. And by 8 or 9, a child is more than capable of spending time on their own, and they need to do that anyways, because you don't want your child to be either unable to spend time alone or terrified of it. You also destroy to some degree their ability to cope on their own, but also their imagination by not requiring them to rely on themselves for their own, for self-calming and safe, and also for self-amusement. There's a rule when you're dealing with people who might be dependent, and this includes the situation where you're dealing with sick people or elderly people, and the rule is, do not do anything for anyone that they can do for themselves, because you take away their competence by doing that.
I want to ask you about the use of physical force on children, because you think it is important to allow kids to explore and harm themselves to gain experience. Still, you believe strict parenting is important, and you think it is justifiable to flick the index finger on certain types of 2-year-olds. Why is the use of force justifiable in those situations?
Well, it depends on the context, and it also depends on what you mean by force. There isn't a disciplinary strategy that you can utilize that doesn't involve something that's unpleasant. Well, you can use reward, but there's different circumstances under which, and you should use reward every time you can because it's more effective. But you often need something that's instantaneous and that gets the message across. And a flick is a very good technique because it's instant, it's harmless, it gets the message across, you can use it publicly, it can't be misused, you won't hurt the child. And you have to have an effective disciplinary strategy for use in social situations, for example.
Yeah, you're talking about the minimizing the use of...
Yeah, well, the basic rules are quite straightforward. Minimum number of rules, because otherwise the enforcement costs accrue and you end up constraining yourself and the child too much. And then minimal necessary force. And you might ask, well, what's minimal necessary force? And the answer to that is minimum intervention necessary to bring the behavior to a halt as rapidly and harmlessly as possible. And that has to be negotiated with the child, because some children are much more difficult to stop than others.
But isn't it possible that the parent-child relationship can be damaged if basic trust and safety is lost?
Oh, it's absolutely the case that it will be damaged, yes. But the application of judicious disciplinary force doesn't damage the relationship, it actually strengthens it. And everyone knows this. Look, if you have a relationship with your wife, let's say, the relationship is partly based on mutual respect, not merely on mutual love. It's also based on mutual respect. And everyone tests out their partner to determine what their limits are. And if you're not subject to corrective action on the part of your partner, you will have no respect for them. Your relationship will just deteriorate very rapidly. So, and it's very important to understand that the limits that you place on children are not something that impede the child-parent relationship, but actually further it substantially.